So in today's lesson, we're going to talk about ball striking. And what we're going to do is we're going to try and move away from the sort of flicking, scooping action and teach you how to get better, crisper contact and ball compression. So what I want to do first is I want to paint two pictures. The first one, I want you to imagine that I'm setting up and how you would probably play like a lob shot. So if I was going to play a lob shot, I would open at the face. And then what I would do is I want to deliver the club with as much loft as possible. So I'd make sure that I deliver the club shaft so it's vertical at the point of impact. And that would mean that I would end up sort of whipping the club through like this. And by doing this, what it does is it produces a lot of spin on the ball, so it goes up. And obviously I'm maximising the loft that I'm delivering as well. Now, what you'd probably do is if you wanted to hit it lower, you might choose less loft, okay? And what you'd also do is you might put the ball in the back of your stance. Now, why is that significant? Because I think it's relatable and it's a continuing towards how you're hitting the golf ball in general. So the big difference between the two, if we go back to the golfer who's like doing the lob shot analogy, you know, is too flicky and too scoopy. What's happening here is that in the downswing, the hands are working too wide. And then by the time they get to the back of the golf ball, the club shaft is too vertical and the hands are behind the club head. So you're adding loft to the club like so, and that is lending itself to poor ball striking or really inconsistent ball striking and obviously a loss of distance. Now what you'll find with a better ball striker is that the hands would make their way more over the ball, and then actually the big difference is instead of being here and here, the better ball striker goes from here and the handle goes up. And as the handle goes up, the club will drop on the back of the ball. And this is what gives you that ability to sort of sweep it and produce less spin. The sort of same analogy as if you were to put the ball in the back of the stance, that's kind of what you would be doing. You can imagine hitting a little chip and run, you're not trying to hit it down into the ground. It's more like a little putting action. So that's what we're trying to do. Now, when I'm working with students, and look, there is an opportunity for us to work together. I've recently set up an online academy, or an online membership if you like. And I'm a massive believer in anybody who reaches out for help, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's going to be online lessons, is that I want to make sure that I'm giving you the right information, and that's what I do. So for only £10 a month, you can have a swing review, and you also gain access to these step-by-step structured practice routines. So it always encourages you to work on the right sort of stuff. And this is exactly what I'm sort of doing today. What we have to do is you have to break it down into little chunks. So if you're somebody who's scooping, you need to understand that you're doing this, and we want to try and find a way to get that handle working up. So how do we kind of go about that? And what's an easy little drill that we could do to make a big difference? Well, what we need to do is we need to get this feeling of changing the position of the club itself. So what I tend to find with golfers who return the club like this, when they get quite scoopy, okay, and they're hitting it like this, is that's the way that they tend to evolve to start. Because why would you not? They tend to position the hands quite vertically, you know, the hands quite centered in line with my sort of sternum, and then they grip the club like so. So this sort of my trail hand, it almost becomes quite weak. It kind of sits quite on top of the club. And it's almost like when you think about it, this hand, if I hold it like so, is applying sort of too much pressure towards the body. Now, what I would suggest that you experiment with is thinking about it different, is to rotate your hand a little bit stronger to the point where you can see the fingertips, as I'm demonstrating here, are pointing more up towards the sky. And the reason for that is because you really want to understand that this trail hand's responsibility is to apply a pressure to the side of the club. So I want this trail hand pushing the club up and through the ball. I don't want to be hitting with this right hand in downward fashion. I want to be going up with a more sweeping action. And that's a big difference. And what you tend to find, or what I tend to experiment with students, is if I've got somebody who holds it like this, at least as a bit of a drill, what I'll do is I'll get them to position the club shaft a little bit higher. So instead of it being low, a little higher, it also sits a little bit more so that the butt end of the club is ahead of the ball, or in line with your or in line with your lead leg. And then from there, just to rotate that hand over, so you can see the fingertip nails there, the fingernails, that's the word I'm looking for. And then that way, you see, it's going to feel like it's a much stronger position. But what will happen now is if you go from this position and you still hit it with a scoop, you're going to be exposed and you're going to hit miles left. So it's going to force you to hit it more out. And this sort of thing works all the time. Now, like I do with my students, you're trying to learn new experiences. Okay, so you could do this for a practice session. And then what you could do is, if you didn't like that grip, it doesn't matter. You go back to your old grip, and then what you do is you try and get the same feeling. But the problem is, and the reason why I'd experiment changing your hold a little bit, is because when you've got somebody, like I said earlier, who is sort of scooping and flicking at it, they've theoretically got 3 common problems, okay? Now, the first one that tends to be a bit of a problem is how you're moving your body. You tend to be a bit this way instead of understanding to get up. The next problem is, like I say, you don't get your hands moving up and through the ball. You know, sometimes on the channel I'll talk about swinging up the wall. You tend to swing around. And the last one is you don't know how to close the face. So the reason why I love this sort of drill is because what you're doing is, by changing the grip position, even if it's just for one practice session, what it means is that you don't have to worry about squaring the face as much, and it will happen more naturally. And what you can then do is just concentrate on the feeling of going more up. Do you see what I mean? And then as soon as your brain starts to see results where there's a bit more maybe draw bias, or it's a bit lower in its flight, or it just sounds crisper, then you'll become more and more susceptible to making changes all the time. But I promise you one thing, and this is what, again, I've tried to set up and I try to do on the YouTube channel. You can't see it all the time with golfers. You can't just come down and hit 100 balls doing similar things that you do expecting to change. I promise you it won't happen. So have a go. Hopefully it makes sense. We need to feel like the handle is moving more up through the hitting zone to give you more compression. And then what you also need to do is, I would just position the shaft a little differently and position your trail hand a little differently, because that way you'll find it easier to go up, because you won't be as stressed about squaring the face. See you soon.